Ever get that feeling? Like walking home alone at night,
Yeah.
keys in hand, checking over your shoulder.
Makes you grip those keys a little tighter, right?
Exactly. And double checking the locks once you're inside.
Oh, absolutely. It's just natural to want to feel safe.
We all want that sense of security. But imagine that feeling just shattered, gone. That's the reality for victims of stalking.
It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? Having that basic safety ripped away. And it's even worse when it happens online.
Because then it feels inescapable.
Like it can reach you anywhere, anytime.
Right, and that's what makes this deep dive so important today. We're looking at brand new right-to-know laws in the UK.
Oh, interesting.
They were actually sparked by a high-profile case, one that really exposed how vulnerable victims are in our digital world.
It does make you think, doesn't it? How we protect people from this kind of thing when so much of our lives are online these days.
Right. So to really get into this, we need to talk about British actress Nicola Thorp. Her story is honestly chilling.
Oh, I remember hearing about this. Wasn't it a truly awful situation?
It really was. She was stalked by someone calling himself, get this, the Grim Reaper.
Oh, gosh.
And he used tons of fake accounts, dozens of them, to send her violent messages. Misogynistic stuff, too.
That constant bombardment, all those threats from who knows where, it must have had a terrible impact on her.
It's horrifying. And it wasn't just online, either. This stalker told Thorpe he'd been close enough to her on a train to smell her.
Oh, it really highlights how online stalking can spill over into the real world. That real world danger is so important to remember.
You got it. And this guy, this Grim Reaper, he hid behind that anonymity while invading her space in the real world. Talk about a constant invisible threat.
It's just awful. So what happened? They catch him?
They did, yeah. He ended up getting 30 months in prison, plus a lifetime restraining order. But here's the really shocking part. Thorpe only learned his real identity at the trial.
So all that time, she didn't even know who was tormenting her.
Exactly. And that's why Thorpe's case is so important. It showed a huge flaw in how we dealt with stalking. Victims were left terrified, not even knowing who to look out for.
A restraining order can't be much use if you don't know who you're supposed to be avoiding.
Exactly. And that brings us to these right-to-know powers.
Yeah.
They're trying to fix that problem. So what are they?
Well, they basically let the police tell the victim who the online stalker is much earlier in the investigation than before.
I see. Does that raise any concerns, telling the victim so early? I mean, could it backfire?
It's a tough one for sure. There are benefits and risks to consider. On the one hand, knowing who the stalker is can be empowering for the victim.
Right, makes sense.
They can start taking precautions, maybe prevent things from getting worse. Plus, it takes away that terrifying anonymity. Suddenly, there's a face to the threats.
Like taking back some control.
Exactly. And it helps them build a case, really advocate for their own safety.
Okay, that all sounds positive. What about the other side? What are the worries?
Well, some people worry that revealing the stalker's identity too soon could make them lash out, try to retaliate.
Right, or warn them that they're being investigated.
Exactly. That could make the investigation much harder. So it's a real balancing act, empowering the victim, but also keeping them safe.
That's a tough one. Sounds like each case would need to be looked at really carefully.
Absolutely. And it's just one piece of the puzzle, really. The UK is making a bunch of other changes, too, like how they use stalking protection orders.
Stalking Protection Orders, or SPOs, what exactly are those?
They're like civil orders, ways to restrict what a perpetrator can do. Things like they can't go near the victim's home or work, or contact them online. Even mentioning the victim on social media could be banned.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What are they changing about them?
Well, now SPOs can be put in place after someone's convicted, even if there wasn't one before.
So even if someone's in prison for stalking, they can't just keep harassing the victim from their cell.
Exactly. They've closed that loophole. And another big change. Courts can issue these orders even if someone was acquitted, if they still seem like a risk.
So even if there wasn't enough evidence to convict them, the court can still step in and protect the victim. That's important because proving stalking can be incredibly difficult.
You're absolutely right. And it's not just about legal stuff. They're also working on better communication between different agencies, making sure victims don't slip through the cracks.
Meaning?
Well, let's say someone reports harassment to the police, but it doesn't quite meet the requirements for criminal charges.
Okay, I'm following.
The police can still tell victim support services about it, and those services can help the person stay safe.
So everyone's working together, sharing information. That makes sense. What about this idea of standardized programs for stalkers? What are those all about?
Ah, those are programs designed to help rehabilitate people who've been stalking others. Therapy, education about healthy relationships, that sort of thing.
So instead of just punishing them, they're trying to change their behavior.
Exactly. Holding people accountable is important, of course, but if we can get to the root of the problem, we can really start to protect victims in the long run. And having national standards for these programs means they'll be more consistent and hopefully more effective across the UK.
Makes sense. But how big of a problem is stalking, really? I mean, how common is it?
You might be shocked to hear this, but 1 in 7 people in England and Wales have experienced stalking at least once.
Wow. That's a lot higher than I would have thought. It really puts it in perspective.
It shows just how important these changes are. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, put it well. She said the goal is to take power away from abusers and give it back to victims.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Empowering victims and recognizing how serious stalking really is.
Absolutely. Especially in this digital age where it's so much easier for abusers to hide and to harass their victims relentlessly.
It's a big step in the right direction, even if it's not perfect.
Agreed. Definitely a lot more work to do, but it's a start.
So, to wrap up, what's the key takeaway here?
Well, I think it's that these new laws are a huge step forward in the fight against stalking. It's about recognizing how serious this is, especially in our digital world, and giving victims the power to protect themselves.
And it makes you wonder, what else can we do to prevent stalking in this increasingly digital world?
It's a big question. How can online platforms spot and stop this kind of behavior? How can law enforcement keep up with these complex crimes?
And as a society, how do we challenge the attitudes that lead to stalking in the first place?
It's complex, no doubt about it. Lots of work still to be done.
It is. But it feels like things are moving in the right direction. It's something we need to keep talking about. And if anyone listening is going through this, remember, you're not alone. There's help out there.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate to reach out. There are resources, people who care, and they want to help.
And on that note, that's our deep dive for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining.